Greetings. Welcome to the DragonCon Urban Fantasy Track and our discussion of the season 15 episode Unity, which we all have to admit was crazy and full of all kinds of things to discuss. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to first have all of my wonderful panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with some topics. If anyone is watching us live and you would like to chime in, please do. We appreciate it. Hi, we've got Beth Ann over here saying hello. So, hi, Beth Ann. And we will go ahead. Oh, and there's Renita. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and have you guys introduce yourselves, and we'll start with Beth.
Hi, my name is also Beth, and my mother's name is Anne. I write paranormal fiction and nonfiction, and I have been a Supernatural fan since the pilot episode first aired 15 years ago.
Wow. Okay, there you go. Keith.
Hi, I'm Keith R. A. DeCandido. I have written 3 of the Supernatural novels, which then freaked me the hell out when somebody who wrote Supernatural novels then became a character on the show, and then later became God, but we'll get into that later. I wrote Nevermore and Bone Key and Heart of the Dragon. I also wrote the text for the John Winchester ruled journal that Inside Editions put out, which is some of the text from John's journal, and I wrote the introduction for Smart Pop's essay collection called In the Hunt. I've also written a whole bunch of other things, which you can find on. If you search my name online, you'll find all the other things I've written, both media tie-ins and not. So.
Okay, thank you, Gail.
Hi, I'm Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Bryce, and I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, post-apocalyptic fiction, as Morgan Bryce, urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. And even before I fell in love with the show, I was writing worlds that Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. Plenty of monsters, plenty of magic, plenty of spooky stuff. And then I discovered the series midway through season 11, binge watched all 11 seasons in 4 months to be able to start live tweeting. I also still haven't found the bottom of the rabbit hole. I'm still falling.
Well, the question that begs the question: is there a bottom to this rabbit hole? I'm not sure there is. Maybe in a few weeks we'll see. Damien.
Hey, I'm Damien. I am a fan panelist here. I have done the Supernatural fan panel at DragonCon since the very beginning when it was over on X-Trek, and then when it moved over to the Urban Fantasy Trek. I also do other treks for DragonCon as well as several podcasts. I do a pop culture podcast called the Weekend Justice Podcast over at needcoffee.com. And we do a couple of other things at different pop culture conventions and DragonCon every year. And I do the Stuff We Love, Stuff We Hate podcast over on SoundCloud and YouTube as well.
Thank you. And Kristen.
Hi, my name is Kristen Jackson. I'm a graphic designer and freelance artist. I work right now mostly in film. I've been a dedicated fan of the show for a very long time, and I've also had the privilege of working with some of the behind-the-scenes crew over the years, and it's really a family. So I'm really personally feeling the end of the series because from my experience, the cast and the crew had a really tight-knit bond, which can be kind of rare in the TV industry. So anyway, I am just very thankful for Carol for inviting me to these panels, and at DragonCon, and then again here in these live stream panels. So thanks, Carol. And
well, you're very welcome.
Y'all are cool too.
Well, thank you for joining us. It's always great to have you, and we appreciate it. Now, there's so much to cover, and I sit down when I go through my notebook and I try to think about what's the good way to progress. I've got my topics, my questions, and it's like, which one do you start with? And to be honest, this week was a little more difficult because the thing I wanted to start with and what I really will start with myself, is something that, well, it's not this comment, but I wanted to show this, that the prediction that was correct, yeah, from last week's discussion. Are you talking about the part where Billy has something up her sleeve? I'm assuming that now that's what you're referring to. I just didn't want that to get buried. But the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that what on earth is going on with Dean? I mean, I've got these notes, I take notes about stuff that happens, and then I take notes about my own reaction. And here we go. The key to death's door. Yeah, that's right. The key to death's door. Very good.
You've got to remember that tiny little detail that they dropped in with Sergei in the when he was healing Jack. I was like, that seemed like an important thing. So I just filed it in the back of my head. And sometimes they disappear into my brain and I never see them again. But this time I remembered. So. There you go.
And and I mean, when they were showing, how they always do their then preview parts of the previews, and I was like, oh yeah. And anyway, but that was a nice catch, Kristen, and for Renita as well. Now, but back to my question. Or back to my befuddlement, is what it really is. It's not an actual question. What on earth is going on with Dean? I mean, did this seem to the rest of you to be so far over the top, even for him, that I just kept thinking, at first I thought, okay, is he play acting? I guess you could say. Or is he just really off his rocker? I mean, has he just lost it? And Beth, we'll start with you. What was your reaction to his behavior throughout the episode?
I kind of just wanted to smack him for the most part. I talked last week about how Dean is stubborn, and Dean has always been very, very stubborn. And, he can be like a dog with a chew toy sometimes. He just latches onto something and he will not let go, that this is the way we have to do things, or, that this is the only possible path we can take. I mean, right. Even this week, Sam even pointed it out a couple of times. Like, doesn't this ever get old for you? It's always so, it has to be this way because other people have said so. But yeah, I felt like the stubbornness was taken to a whole new level this week, and it didn't seem in character to me for Dean, especially turning against Sam as violently as he did. I just felt like that was a little extreme. And I don't know if it was the writers or, like you suggested, maybe there's something more to it that we just don't know about yet. I don't know.
Okay. Keith, what's your reaction?
I similar to Beth's. I'm willing to have a wait and see attitude for it because this is Supernatural, and I can think off the top of my head of about 12 different in-story explanations for why he's behaving like an ass. What particularly tweaked me, and also tweaked my wife, we were talking about this in great depth while we were watching the episode, is when he's saying Jack's not family, which flies in the face of 14 and a half years of life. If Jack's not family, then Bobby isn't family, by that rubric. Which the whole show has been my three dads since Jack was introduced. And it just doesn't make sense that he would suddenly feel that way. But there could be any number of explanations for it. Not the least of which is just that after 15 years, he's finally snapped, which certainly would not, I mean, he said it himself that when he was talking with Jack in the car, which was actually one of his better moments, was when he was talking with him in the Impala right before they went back into the bunker, is that this is that he's really just out at the end of his rope. In fact, he's past the end of his rope at this point. What also got me was when he actually pulled a gun on Sam, and in particular because Dean's entire life, and Sam said it in the episode, Dean's entire life since he was 6 or whatever has been defined by his father's words to him which was take your brother outside as fast as you can. Don't look back. Now, Dean, go. That's his life. That is all. That has been his entire life since his mother died the first time. And,
Right. Yeah, which
and I really and the fact that he's going against that on several different levels is worrisome. I'm hoping that there is an in-story explanation and it's not just bad writing and creating yet another frickin' argument between Sam and Dean. Latest series collect them all. But we'll see. I mean, there's still a lot that episode left us with a lot more questions than we started with, and a lot more to explain. That wasn't so much an ending as a stopping point, So
right. Well, they've only got a few left to kind of answer some of those questions. Gail.
So the episode was written by Meredith Glynn, who's written 16 episodes, including ones like Regarding Dean. She co-authored Lebanon. She co-authored The Gamblers, which I think are some of the strongest episodes we've had in the last few years. So I have a higher level of trust for her than I would if this was a Buck Lemming episode. I can never remember what their real names are, but Buck Lemming works. What it reminded me of, at first I thought, wow, that's really out of character. This is terrible writing. Wait, Meredith Glynn doesn't do terrible writing. The last time it looked like this, when Sam was being controlled by the doctor in Asylum and pulled the gun on Dean, and Dean palmed the bullets so that Sam couldn't actually kill him. Dean has tried to kill Sam a couple of times. When Sam said, "Would you trade me?" it reminded me of the scene in the Mexican Cantina where Dean said that he had traded Sam's life for peace and being sent into the empty, and he was ready to sacrifice Sam. He used the words trade right there in regards to death when Old Death died. I'm wondering if that's really a coincidence. So, and I always make sure I read Night Sky's threads on Winchester Family Business and Lindsay Burness's analysis on Fangasm before I come on here, because one of them's a psychologist, one of them just knows this stuff. And I think the real question is Dean being controlled? We're in this funhouse of mirrors where what's real and what isn't. What is Chuck controlling? What is Billy controlling? Who's being controlled? And it's starting to really kind of screw with our brains. And so I tend to think Dean was being controlled and shook it off, because when Chuck blasts the door down and stomps out, he goes, "You did it again. I still didn't get the ending I wanted," because he wanted Cain and Abel. Well, how would he have anticipated that if he hadn't set Dean up to do it? And so we're still back on free will versus predestination, team free will. And that gives me some hope that isn't really Dean completely. It's Dean being controlled like Sam was controlled in the asylum.
Okay. Well, and there, I did like the way that that scene was juxtaposed with that of Amara and Chuck, stuck in the whatever room they were in. And when she still had him trapped or whatever. And, when they get there, when they start having this confrontation and Dean pulls the gun, Chuck says, "Now that's my ending." And, even so, I mean, it's all juxtaposed. So there may be something to that whole control kind of thing. Damien.
All right. So Gail immediately went into where I was going, right? There are things that have led up to this in the episode. Starting partially with how the episode's shot. It starts with who? It goes Sam, Dean, and it cuts over, or vice versa, whichever one, I can't remember. But because I went through the episode twice today, right? Because my power was out the night I should have had everything watched, but that didn't happen. So I watched it once this morning, and I watched it once a couple of hours ago. And that's the thing that stuck out: how the episode was filmed and the conversations between Chuck and Amara that lead up to this, and then Chuck's response to everything else. Sure. Is Dean at the end of his wits with it? Yeah, he's been there before, right? They've always had, like, the big bad has always been the big bad, the end of the world. Everyone's depending on us as these two people. And you see where Chuck kind of knew what was going to happen before it happened, right? That's how he even pitched it to Amara. Hey, you should just probably join me right now, right? And then we can do this all over again. Dean's gonna betray you. He knew everything, right?
Right.
So when he blows that door open, that's him being, PO'd and like, okay, hey guys, I'm here now. And you see how everything kind of goes sideways after that, right? They go through all the motions, and then he goes, yeah, okay, I don't care anymore.
Yeah,
But
I'm
guess
just
what?
leaving.
You just wasted Jack's life for nothing, and I know that's going to hurt you more than anything else. I'm out. And walks away. He knew what kind of was being set in motion. So with that, sure, did Dean seem a little more off kilter than maybe some of his other moments? A little, right? But I think some of that was being steered that way. And again, with all of the jumping around that's happening, and you've got the Empty jumping around killing people, and you've got Billy with her own plan being revealed, and then Chuck and Amara going together. I'm pretty sure, that this episode was meant to be the giant plot device of, ooh, what's going on here to kind of throw everybody off.
Okay. Kristen.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Damien and Gail's points about that. It did seem like Dean was, for me, when Chuck had made the statement about and talking to Amara about he was, writing this, what about omniscient don't you understand? Yeah. That he had just kind of taken Dean's personality and put that, like you said, dialed it up emotionally. So he had those little blinkers, blinders around his eyes, that he was so focused and goal oriented, and that's kind of how Dean is anyway. And plunge straight ahead. I've got a plan. I'm going to follow it through. And then Chuck had set up that dynamic of the brother versus brother, and then once again they fail to, follow the script, and they go off script again. And that's when he finally just blows the door down. He's like, "What, you people?" And that's, So I'm thinking now that dramatic ending that Becky was reading, and she was horrified. She probably saw, the shooting, and they were going to shoot each other and die, and then Jack would blow up, and because I don't know if you're going to get to this, point later, Carol, but when they were saying that Jack is going to be this black hole of divine energy, is sucking it all in. Well, that would suck in Castiel if he's standing right next to him. Down he goes. So, that to me seems like it was the terrible story that Becky was reading, and then they couldn't do it because of Sam. Just he's the heart of the show, and he's the brain, and he's thinking about it, and he's a little more thoughtful, and he was seeing that, here we go again. So he was able to pull them out of Chuck's story once again.
So they would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for a meddling Sam?
Yes. Exactly.
So about like usual.
The Scooby-Doo moment right there.
Right.
Well, and one of my favorite lines in this episode, because it was something I had been thinking myself over since last week, was when Chuck says to Amara, "What is it about omniscient that you people don't understand?" When she says, "You've orchestrated the whole thing, and all this," and she was shocked. Well, so that was an interesting point to me, because I did keep wondering that. As I said recently, it was like, well, if he's omniscient, wouldn't he know what they were all doing? Like, are they really, because either that brings up the point that he isn't in fact omniscient, or if he is omniscient, they already know he knows what the heck they're up to. Now, whether or not he orchestrated the whole thing is another, that's not the same thing as being omniscient, but I kind of want to explore this idea a bit, and just where do you think that puts things in, I guess, the context of the show when you're talking about omniscience versus, it's not the same thing as free will, or is it? And Keith, we'll start with you this time.
Well, I'm glad we're going to this, because this is one of the things I wanted to talk about in this episode in particular, is that despite all of the changes that the character played by Rob Benedict has gone through since he was introduced, they have not lost sight of the fact that how he was introduced was as a writer. And he is still, in essence, a writer. He is still being written as a writer. He is still talking like a writer. And as all of us on this panel who are writers can attest, and all the people in the audience who are writers who can attest, characters don't always behave the way you want them to. Writers are theoretically omniscient, yes. But sometimes the characters don't do what you want them to do and take over the story and become more interesting and or less interesting in some cases, and just completely go off the rails on you. And that's pretty much what's happening with Chuck here, is that he's trying to write the story he wants to, but the characters aren't behaving themselves. And every writer who has ever written a work of fiction can sympathize with that. And I like the fact that they're keeping that theme, that the character of Carver Edlund, as originally introduced as Chuck, as God, as a prophet, as God, as whatever, is still ultimately a guy who's trying to make a story.
Okay.
And he's obvious, and we've already seen him, trash all his other drafts at the beginning of the season.
Right. Well, and if you think back to when you talk about how he was introduced, and how cool that was, and how humorous it was, and what it has become, it's kind of a weird thing to say, okay, you started out as just kind of this guy, and then all of a sudden
It's kind of sad,
guys
really,
you would
though.
go hang out and have a drink with, or whatever, a piece of pie, and then it's
Well,
certainly
he's turned into something very sad when you look at it in that perspective. Like the Chuck we got introduced to versus the spiteful whatever it is that we have right now, because I'm keeping it kid friendly. Definitely, it's sad. It's like, man, I really, really don't like this version of Chuck.
Yeah, it's very different. Gail.
On the omniscience piece, omniscience doesn't preclude still having blind spots.
True.
So,
true.
As any kid knows, if you want to distract mom from what you're doing, send your sibling to go do something else, and while she's clamping down on that, you get to go do this. So, and yes, Chuck has gotten rid of all the other worlds, but that still leaves 8 billion people here. And even if he's just focused on our little gang, there's still a fair number of them to run interference. So if you can fake him out, get his blind spot, you can still theoretically operate something that he isn't looking at the moment, which is about as good as you're going to get from somebody who is theoretically omniscient.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
So that's one piece here, but I liked what Damien said, and I think that Damien, I had a thought and I lost it. Tell me again, quick, what you said, because I know I liked it and I was going to play it.
About the version of Chuck that we have now versus the version that we were introduced to.
So if you've been among a lot of writers, there are the happy fun ones, there are the let's all get along ones, and then there is, there are some that maybe life didn't go the way they wanted to. They missed out on the award. They never got the acclaim they thought they should have gotten. They got trashed by Kirkus Reviews or Publishers Weekly. They're bitter and they're angry because they should have been a contender. And they're out there. Even if they're famous, they aren't as famous as they wanted to be. So they're angry and they're bitter. And that's what Chuck reminds me of on a writing level, is we've all run into those people. Usually,
So you're saying he's a very, very sad puppy.
they are. Usually sitting there, you know, with a drink. Yeah, sometimes they're even rabid.
Good one.
Oh, yeah.
But they're just bitter because you know, their glory was stolen from them. And that's, looking at Chuck as a writer now, that's exactly who I see him being. Is he's in, you know, it isn't working out the way he wanted it to, and he's bitter about that.
Well,
So-
even in this
Yeah,
episode, yeah.
You saw that writ large in the autograph scene with the angels when they were in
Mhm.
heaven. That was, I mean, I've seen that autograph line. I've been at the head of that autograph line.
Right. Been on both sides in the, yeah.
Both sides. Yes, yes.
Yeah, well, he does make the comment in this episode that he looks around him and all he sees is his failures. So that's a good analogy in that you know, in that particular instance. Damien, did you have anything else you? Oh, go ahead,
in
Gail.
the
I'm sorry.
autograph line scene, he had contempt for his fans.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
it wasn't just wanting to be loved. He was contemptuous of the people who did love him because he wanted something else and he hasn't been able to get it. And so all of his accomplishments mean nothing to him because he couldn't get this one thing. And that's a very human failing.
Yeah. Damien, do you have anything you want to add?
So when you think about the whole omniscient thing too, you got to think, and it's something that came up in the chat, right? And it's Renita said where Castiel is the only one that didn't follow orders, right? He was the one with the crack from the assembly line. And when you look at the three people he's addressing, it's the three that will not cooperate. And for some reason, he still hasn't figured out why these three particular characters aren't cooperating. But also, he doesn't know what's going on with the empty. He doesn't really know what's going on with Billy, right? So there's omniscience to a point, right? And then there's other things, right? I think each of them have their own little thing, because think about it. Billy has no idea what's going on in her library at all. No one knows that the empty's around but Sam.
Right,
So
right, yeah.
there are a lot of blind spots, as Gail put it, floating throughout that episode.
And Sam was able to lie to the empty.
Yep.
So obviously the empty wasn't omniscient about what Billy was up to, or she wouldn't have bought what Sam made up on the fly while she was choking him.
Well, and then the empty doesn't have access to the earth realm, so to speak, right? It was like, oh, well, you can't come there, and Billy can't come here right now because she's stuck. And it's like,
Unless you're
okay,
summoned.
you got two places you can
Unless you're
be,
summoned.
and that's it. It's like, and really, let's face it, that's the grumpy dad that look, I don't care what you kids are doing. I want you to stop making noise so I can go back to bed.
Or go back
Pretty
to
much.
whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she
Kristen.
specifically said she wanted to go back to sleep.
Right.
The other thing about being omniscient, just because you perceive everything doesn't mean you can keep track of all of it or understand all of it.
True, true. And as a couple of you have mentioned, it's sort of like you're looking over here while something else is going on over there. I guess that was Gail's point. So yeah, just
Well,
because
you
you're
were-
omniscient doesn't mean you're omniscient 100% in 100% of the areas at the same time.
Well, he made them team free will. So
What's that?
they're not always going to follow the choices they're directed toward.
Yeah.
And it also
Kristen.
could, yeah, it also could be like selective hearing too, because if you're absorbing everything all the time, you have to focus. And just like if I'm sitting here right now, I'm sure the air conditioning is on, but I don't hear it. My ears would pick it up, but my brain tunes it out. So Chuck may just have so much input as the all-powerful being that unless he's specifically focusing on one thing at a time or multiple things at a time, that the other things just kind of fade into the background until something calls his attention to it. And I thought that there might be an interesting point to the omniscient versus the free will, in that everybody around Sam and Dean, who's been a part of their lives, seems to be sucked into this free will. Whether it was Castiel, and he was an obedient angel up until he encountered the Winchesters. You had Crowley, who was a terrible person, a terrible demon, and but he sort of started to become something different after a lot of encounters with the Winchesters and Ruby and Meg, and it's like Bobby and everybody around them seems to be infected with this ability to be
Rowena.
somebody else other than what the script had written for them. And so maybe that could be why God is having a hard time dealing with these people. It's because whatever was special that he created around them, it's created something that even he can't penetrate.
For that matter, they spent their entire careers not doing what they were destined to do, starting with Sam not being minion of the yellow-eyed demon of Azazel like he was supposed to be. Neither of them becoming quite what the vessels for Lucifer and Michael that they were intended to be, and so on. And the whole thing of how they're the child of a hunter and a man of letters, and that didn't work out the way it was supposed to either. All of their destinies have been twisted or screwed up with by them.
Well, there's something that God points out this episode too. When Amara addresses the connection between her and Dean, and he goes, "I didn't write that," and she goes, "That wasn't you."
He's like, "Ooh, yeah."
And she's
we'll
like,
talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So even Amara had that sort of. She started getting that free will vibe and picking up on it too, and she wasn't. She started out as this evil force, but being in close contact with Dean one-on-one seems to have shifted her destiny along with everybody else that they've come in contact with. And old death that really he was fascinated by these guys. What is with these two humans that just don't fit the entire rest of the pattern of the universe, and they're just disrupting everything. But he was compelled, he was very fascinated by them as to what's with these two people out of everybody else through all the history.
Disrupting the natural order has been said how many times, because that's what Sam and Dean do. They are they're a disruption field.
Yeah.
They
go off script.
Yeah.
They go
all
off.
the time.
Well, Beth,
and
Beth, what about you? Yeah.
I think the writer analogy is perfect. I mean, especially as Gail pointed out, if you look at it in perspective of a frustrated writer who feels like they're not getting the accolades they deserve, not just from their fans, but also from their own characters. And I actually think of, whenever something bad happens to you, and somebody will always say, "Oh, it's going to be okay. God has a plan." And I think of Chuck like that. He has a plan. He has written these stories. He's got it all laid out. He's like, "Look, people, you just have to follow what I've written. This is it. This is all you have to do." And the problem is that not everybody's on board with that plan. And Sam and Dean are the best example of that. And so I think, yes, Chuck is omniscient in the sense that he's like, this is everything that's going to happen, but he's not counting on the fact that not everybody is going to go along with that plan. And he's frustrated constantly by that. I mean, I think we've seen him try again and again and again with all of these worlds, and it never quite works out for him. So he's had enough. I think he's, as you mentioned, he's ready just to have a complete reset and start all over again with possibly some non-carbon based life form, so that maybe that different form will be more compliant and be willing to go along with it.
That would explain why did I pick that? Why did
I find
I pick
myself
that?
reminded of Nick Fury's line in Avengers. Yes, but since it was a stupid ass plan, I have decided to ignore it, which is pretty much
Sam and Dean even co-opted profits. Kevin and Donatello, they were supposed to be doing the angel tablets. They were supposed to be
Right.
doing human tablets. And Sam and Dean had them going off doing all kinds of other stuff, or using that information in a way that was off script. So it doesn't matter who Chuck sends, Sam and Dean co-opt them, and the next thing you know, they're, coloring outside the lines.
Yeah.
Well, and there was a comment here which Damien said something about, but that it being interesting that Chuck compared the Castiels and mentioned that this is the only one that didn't follow orders. Perhaps Chuck gave his characters too much free will, and I got a kick out of the what he called him. When he was the self-hating angel of Thursday, was the way he identified Castiel. It's like, okay, yeah, and then somebody else here, or we have another comment about waiting for a confrontation between Death, Chuck, and the Empty, and I see Damien's been responding a few times, and the whole thing with Amara, a couple of things that this reminded me of when you guys were talking about it from the writer's perspective. One thing that she said to Chuck is that all you care about is your own story. That he's not interested in how it affects anyone else or anything like that, and what the result is for him. And what really got me with her was that moment when he tells her, this is later in the episode, of course, but when they're trapped, or she has him trapped, but she's there with them. I guess they're both trapped. She says, they're talking there, and when he tells her about what's really going on, that Dean was actually behind all this, just the look on her face, they're going to kill us, they want to kill us, they're going to try to kill us, they're not going to cage me. And the look on her face was just, was so sad, because even in the very beginning of that episode, she has said to him, well, you and I will always help each other. And in last episode, he's telling her, I will never, no, I won't hurt you. And what I kind of want to explore is that, you brought it up, Kristen, about how interaction with the Winchesters seems to change people or entities or whomever. They're not just always humans, for sure. What is that specific connection that Amara and Dean seem to have? I mean, is it because he talked her back so long ago, or is it, what do we think that special connection is? And Gail, we'll start with you.
So this is really fresh in my mind because I'm writing a recap of all 14 seasons and the essential episodes for my supernatural group in the Winchester Family Business. So I just finished season 11, it's right up. And I always thought that the relationship between Amara and Dean was kind of non-con and stalkerish, because she is this immortal, all-powerful being who fixes on this very good-looking human guy and says, we were meant for each other. Okay, that's like a puppy. He's only going to be around for a little bit. You can't have a soul bond with that kind of power differential. And so I always thought she was kind of on the non-consent. Dean didn't want it. Dean didn't want her. Dean didn't want anything to do with her. And she keeps showing up and going, we're meant to be together. It's like restraining order. So I didn't really feel like he betrayed her in any way, because he never wanted her around to begin with. And it took a long, and so I think what I saw with this, though, was that Chuck wasn't any better toward her. And I'm not sure that she is caged in Chuck. If she and Chuck are co-equal powers, creation and destruction,
Mhm.
then this is maybe reverse Gadriel, where, okay, maybe she's pissed at Dean. Maybe she's disappointed because the puppy didn't like her back. But the great betrayal is Chuck. And Chuck is so big-headed, he never treated her as an equal. And I think he's about to get his comeuppance from the inside as Amara proves that she is indeed his equal and can break free at any time. And while she may be annoyed at Dean and Sam, I think she's going to be more annoyed at what Chuck has been doing, and because he's really the threat to her.
But something to keep in mind is that an angel, as we saw in this very episode when we met the Hippy Dippy Adam, and I loved Lieutenant Gaeta playing the Hippy Dippy Adam. That was awesome. An angel can make somebody immortal, so theoretically, Amara could make Dean immortal also, and then she'd be his puppy forever. And and he's also, she also kind of owes him for releasing her. But the
she can make it immortal, but
the other thing, but I honestly think they very specifically, once Chuck absorbed Amara, deliberately had his yin yang eyes, the black eye and the white eye, and that was a very conscious choice, and that means that was meaningful. You don't go to the trouble of doing that in post production if it's not there for a reason. And I really think that indicates that Amara hasn't been subsumed.
Well, right. Okay. Remember last week we came in and we had all talked about maybe the plan was to fuse them back together, and you saw that happen very, very quickly. With the relationship with Amara and Dean, though, is think about it. She's been locked away for a very, very long time. Even in this episode, she said it took God and 4 archangels in order to lock her away in the first place. I think there's a level of almost like trauma bonding, if you will, right? She knows what it's like to be abused and manipulated by Chuck. And she, is set free by the Winchesters. They go through all of this stuff, and she's been out exploring the world on her own, but at the same time, she knows what they're dealing with, and she knows what her brother is capable of. And I think that is what kind of endears her. I don't know why it's specifically to Dean just yet, but I can see why there's a piece that, is endeared to them. Again, don't know why it's Dean, but I can only think it has to do with, he's handsome and he eats cheeseburgers and pie and drinks beer.
And he's the star of his own TV show.
It's a very rugged free will type of man. But, in all seriousness, though, I understand on a deep level what kind of pain you're in, because I've been in that kind of pain myself. And there's a level of empathy, I think. And again, I would use the term trauma bonding that has gone on with some of that.
Okay. Kristen.
I'm trying to think back, multiple seasons to when Amara first came into the show. And it was Dean who was with her in that darkness. I'm trying to recollect the scenes, and I can't right at the moment. It's like right there. But, she had been locked away for the formation of humanity. So that was really the first conscious being outside of herself that she had been with in a very long time. So that was that initial, connection between them.
So you imprinted on him, sort of, right?
Yes, imprinted on him. That is a perfect word. And when Chuck was being a master manipulator, he knew exactly what buttons to push with her, and it was reflected in her face. But I think after, like you said, there was all the exploring the world and seeing things on her own and having her own little taste of free will and life is that she could kind of, even though she was very hurt by what Chuck was saying, that Dean doesn't like you, he never liked you, he was going to kill you, but I think she also could see past some of that to the fact that he might be, plus that little thing in the back of her head that said maybe he is not being truthful. So maybe Dean really is kind of, well, she can live or die, I don't care. But Amara feels a connection. And so when Chuck kind of absorbed her there, I'm thinking that is the case with the two eyes, that, yeah, she is not as far deep and buried as Chuck might like her to be.
Right. Or as he might think she is, omniscient or not, right? Beth.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah, Amara and Chuck are two halves of the same whole. And so what I wonder about her is if she doesn't have some level of omniscience as well. Certainly she didn't write the book. Chuck is the writer, but I feel like maybe Amara, she's peeked at the manuscript before it went to the printer, or she's an advanced reader or something, and maybe she sees something that's coming. And that's what I always think of when she says these things to Dean, like, we'll never hurt each other, and Dean would never hurt me. There's this kind of weird romantic stalkerish vibe, whatever is going on there. But I also wonder if it's because she knows about something that's going to happen involving him helping her or saving her, and we just haven't seen it play out yet. So I'm kind of waiting to see what happens in that regard.
That's a really good point. If Chuck is the writer of creation, could she be like the writer of destruction?
But here's something to think about, though.
So you're saying she's the editor?
Yeah,
the editor.
Exactly. Yeah.
But here's something to think about with that. We keep focusing on Chuck being the creator, and at the same time, he's the same one who's destroyed world after world after world, right?
Yeah, that's what he's been doing.
It's quite possible that she actually doesn't even realize I can create as well.
Right.
Well, and I thought it was two things I thought were interesting. One is that I think this idea that if Chuck's going to say, "Oh, well, Dean doesn't like you," she's going to go, "Okay, let's join forces and start all over again." Like, I don't buy that, because I think they've really been careful about showing us how much she loves this world.
Mm-hmm.
She's enjoying her time in the hot spring in Reykjavik. She's sitting out in nature. I don't think she would let all of that be destroyed just because Dean doesn't have a crush on her. But I also, I'm what was my second point? Sorry, guys, it's 1:30 in the morning.
That's right. So Beth is in Germany, so that's why.
Oh,
I don't know. It was a good point. Everybody act amazed, and we'll call it good.
Well, if you think of it later, just let us know. And Keith, what about you? Do you have any theories on the attraction or not the attraction, but the connection between Amara and Dean?
He did release her. That is a powerful bond, and they could even, the old trope of the damsel in distress falling in love with the hero who rescued her. Having said that, I don't think that really fits her all that well necessarily. I mean, yes, I'm sure there's a certain amount of imprinting just because, for all intents and purposes, he was the first man she met. But she also, I was joking about how she's the editor, but in a lot of ways she is, because an editor's job really is to bring out the best in the writer's work, is to take the mediocre first draft and massage it and make suggestions and make changes that will make it better. And that's kind of what she's doing when she brings Chuck to the forest, and trying to show him, because all he can see is the bad parts, and every writer has been through that. All they can see in their work is the crap. They see the bad writing. They see the mediocre characters. They don't see the stuff that the readers see necessarily. And Amara is the one who's pointing it out. Amara is the one who's telling him, "Oh, look, this is some good stuff. Keep writing this stuff." you know.
I like the fact that she sort of took that approach when they were on their walk through the park, where she said, someone needs to protect this world, and she
Right.
put herself into that very the role of the doctor. This world is defended, and or the Avengers, and she was going to defend this world, and I thought, well, that's a very she would be especially upset then if God is going to just run over and destroy something that she feels very personally connected to, enough to want to stand up for it.
I think
Yeah,
it's-
Kind of puts her back on the side of being all of a sudden she's been around Sam and Dean too long, and she's starting to pick up the free will vibes,
Well, and it's almost as though at this point that they've changed roles because yeah, Chuck's out there just making everything go away. Now he wants to do his hard reset and get something different. But she's saying, hey, wait a minute, that's not necessarily the only way. Why don't we redo things, and she's definitely the one who's trying to be the voice of reason at this point. Now, this is a good question that Ren has, is that where is Death in all this? The whole episode, she was definitely the topic of conversation, because we knew that was not what I meant. When Sam finds out what the story is from Meg, I'm guessing that probably not too many of you were surprised. Maybe at some of the details, but we even discussed that last week. That I think it was Gail who brought it up, who said, Billy's probably up to something. Yep. And there were a number of facets to that. It wasn't only Billy, but it was Adam, who, Adam was obviously in this for revenge, but what was Seraphina the angel? What was her, by the way, she was a terrible angel. But I'm saying,
she's pretty fun.
Yeah, but here, let me rip out your rib or whatever. So, I think that it was just, I don't know. There were a number of questions there surrounding that whole aspect of, who was doing what and what was their ultimate goal, and everybody seemed to have their own purpose, for wanting to get involved in the project. And it sounded as though this was all Billy starting it and going from there. So my question is, were there any aspects of that particular part of it that surprised you in terms of, how it was presented, of what we know so far, of what we were told in this episode, what the empty / Meg told Sam? Were there any surprises for you in that? And how do you think the whole Adam thing plays in? Or do you think that was just kind of put in for, some comic relief? Or, what was your feeling about all of that? And Damien, I believe it's your turn to go first.
I wasn't surprised in the least bit. The only thing I was surprised about, that Billy wasn't aware around snuffing out all of her minions. That's about it, right?
Okay.
As far as the question, where's Death? I believe she's out having a baby.
Oh, that's right.
Because we discussed that the actress is definitely
The
pregnant.
actress.
No,
The
but I
actress,
also
not
remember,
Billy.
because there are previews. We know we get a lot of answers regarding that this coming week. The previews clearly show there are some direct repercussions with all of this regarding Death. So when I watched, the episode the first time, and then I did the watch through the second time, that's when I saw the previews, and I was like, okay, that makes sense. They're going to address this directly in another episode. The only filler I had was, you don't know that all of your minions are being snuffed out and you're Death?
Right,
What
right. It
gives?
does seem, yeah.
But someone in the chat also said, where do all the Reapers go when they die? Which is a good question. And I was like, all right, that empty? I mean, do they just poof and they're done with existence or what?
Yeah. Well, maybe we will find out. One of those questions they need to answer for us. Kristen.
As for where death is, or what she's been
Well,
up to.
that just I think that we've probably figured out that's from a practical standpoint that the actress herself. But even though that episode was one that was filmed prior to the pandemic, I don't know about like how pregnant was she at that time, or anything. This next episode was the last one the one that's for this week is the last one they filmed prior to having to shut down. So at this point, it could have been just a plot device to keep her from being a part of the show. It's like when they find out, it's like you're finding out what the bad guy did. The bad guy doesn't necessarily have to be on screen or on page at the time that that everybody else is coming to the realization. But
my thought was just that they blew the guest star budget for the episode. But
yeah, there you go.
well,
They
one
must have
thing
dropped that out.
well, like one thing that I, just from the entire scene outside of death, that I am very interested to learn what happens next is Sam has the book. He took the book with him. And then they, because of the immediacy of Chuck and Amara and Jack is now, practically exploding in the hallway. Sam never got to, stop and say, hey, wait a minute, guys, I've got a way to read some of this.
Right.
Now, will they be able to read it? Because if the empty couldn't read it, is it because the empty is illiterate, or is it because there's something that is divine, that a part of divinity that requires, the ability to read this book?
Right. Now, did she say she couldn't read it or she couldn't open it?
I thought the empty said he couldn't
read it,
or he or
I
she
think
or
read.
it.
She said only God can read it. I thought
So she specifically said she couldn't read it. I just that was because there's a difference between those two things. So I'm thinking,
Although it'll be amusing if in fact the empty was illiterate.
And and will they need to bring back
just had bad vision, sleeping too much.
Right.
Well, they need to bring back Donatello to read this book because like as a prophet to read it, start stocking up on chicken or something, and so that kind of stuck with me as well. The book, this book that they've been after for a while, there it is, and now Sam has it, or the Winchesters have it. So so what are they going to do with this book? Is this going to show a way to show God's ending, or I noticed that was a thing that was picked up, and then it with all the rest of the chaos going on with the rest of the episodes, we didn't get to see how this is going to play into the final chapters.
Right. Yeah, the final chapters, indeed. Only a few to go. What about you, Beth? Was there anything about the plan that Billy's plan that?
I mean, Billy having an ulterior motive is not surprising at all. I mean, we did discuss that already. I was a little surprised at Adam showing up. It was just kind of funny, like, oh, hey, by the way, Adam's still alive. He lives just over in Texas. It was a little like, really? It's taken us 15 years to learn that. It seems like we should know that already. But what I thought was interesting is that when Adam was talking to Jack, he was talking about, that spark of divinity. He said it could create life, or in your case, you can destroy life. And so that makes me wonder what's ultimately going to happen with Jack now that he's basically a ticking time bomb. Is it going to be destruction that results from his, his explosion, whatever is happening? Or is he going to be able to retain some amount of control to have some kind of positive outcome, some sort of life-giving outcome. So I'm really curious to see if that was just a throwaway line, or if it winds up having some bearing on the storyline.
Okay. Keith.
Well, it was a little weird to just have Adam sort of thrown into the middle of this episode where 543 other things were going on.
Yeah.
It's I mean, Kane got like whole big massive storylines, and the best they could do for Adam was, a glorified cameo. Having said that, like I said before, I loved the hippy dippy Adam, and I loved casting Alessandro Giuliani as Adam. But the thing is, I'm also wondering, and Beth's comment kind of tweaked this in my head. Adam's rib has always been a symbol of creation. That's traditionally the method by which Eve was created, was from one of Adam's ribs. Plus, it's also one of the all-time great episodes of MASH, but that's probably not what they're referring to. But
that's a whole different panel.
Yeah.
And this is where we show
Not
our
about a
age,
place in
ladies and
Chicago.
gentlemen.
But and I'm wondering if that indeed is meant to foreshadow something that will be happening either with Jack or with Amara.
Okay. Okay. Gail.
Couple of things. One is Supernatural, for the most part, sticks to a very loosely interpreted Judeo-Christian canon, but it mostly pulls from that mythology. But I keep thinking about Kali, who is the goddess of both destruction and creation, who also wears a garment made of fingers. We've got a lot of, how many fingers have gotten cut off in this season so far? Night Sky on Winchester Family Business talks about Chuck's Thanos snap is the idea of cutting off fingers to stop him from having the ability to snap. Is that kind of foreshadowing?
Ah, okay.
So the fingers and the Kali thing, just because creation and destruction are now embodied in one body, would not foreclose them being both in one. So, that's a possibility, even though Christianity has this duology of light and dark, good and bad. A lot of other cultures don't. And if we're going back to basics, then having them truly unified, it's all of the primal forces in one place, because you can't really create without destroying, and vice versa. The other piece that struck me on the rib, and in most TV shows you'd go, oh, I wouldn't go there. But Supernatural's writers do tend to do their homework very, very well, especially on the lore. And there is a quibble on the term used in the Bible, rib, is actually mistranslated. It is the word for side, which is only ever used one other place in the scripture, which refers to the side of the temple in Jerusalem. So in other words, God didn't take a minor bone from Adam to create Eve. He split the being into two parts.
Okay. Right. Gotcha.
Because if you have an eternal being that is both in one and has no corporeal body, gender means nothing. There are no markers. How would you know you're a spirit? Created a corporeal being, split that being in half to create male and female. And so that rib, that side, is the creation energy, theoretically, that didn't just create Eve, but basically was half and co-equal because it was a side of God. If these guys can parse out Enochian and some of the stuff they got from dispensationalism for the end times, they might have found that. I mean, I could be way off. But did that then put some of that creation energy into Jack? Is this a failsafe? Is this, and have we, as I said before with Kali, embodied creation and destruction in the same being, with or without the fingers? the fickle finger.
Yeah, I mean, well,
Mhm.
and as we've pointed out, they better be telling us something because we've only got 3 to go.
Yeah.
So
Look,
yeah,
if they manage to find a key in one episode where it would normally take 2 seasons, I think we're good.
Right?
yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
Adam would
they
have gotten
got
his
that
own
key very
episode,
quickly.
his own episode in a previous season.
Well,
I
and
do want to give them credit for, because I don't know how much time we have left, and I want to make sure this gets mentioned. The casting of Alessandro Giuliani as Adam was really nice casting. I love that they cast somebody who was half Italian, half Chinese as the first human, instead of just
Oh, yeah,
casting,
yeah.
the white guy, which is what or which is usually the default for such things. And as somebody who is of Italian heritage, I especially appreciated it, but also the fact that he's mixed race from 2 different sides of the earth was a very nice touch, and he was hilarious.
oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And he did a great job. He was it was just kind of, I guess, you don't really know what to expect when you see Adam being portrayed somewhere. And so it's when he shows up being this guy who's he's definitely got revenge on his mind, and he's been trying to do this for a really long time. If he's trying to he's upset for being thrown out of the garden, for
Well,
all this time. That's what he's been
He
concentrating
did say
on.
he
But the
deserved.
other thing, though, remember he said, but then he went after our kids. I think he's
Right.
more
Well,
upset
that's
about
true. Okay.
that,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Then
Yeah.
okay, we got kicked out. He said, but then he started going after our kids, and that's where you saw his whole demeanor change, right?
Mhm.
From I'm hippy dippy and I'm going along to no, this is why I'm upset.
And we've already seen what happened to his kids through Tim Amundsen's portrayal of Cain and
Mhm.
how miserable
yeah,
his
yeah.
life was.
Right. And
Yeah.
it's something that came up in the chat. Like everybody's like, well, where's Eve? And it's like, Eve got
Right.
axed by Dean season 6. So
Mother of all.
Yeah, I had forgotten about that because that was a long time ago. Yeah, yeah, that was a
The
while
story
back,
so far.
which is mind-boggling in and of itself when you think about it for this. But and we are about out of time because I know we have people who have to do other things as well. But I do want to have one final thing I wanted to bring up, and it just somebody mentioned it earlier when we were talking about Dean and his craziness, but the fact that Dean even said out loud, so yelled it loudly enough that anybody in the bunker could have heard it. Didn't have to be just Jack down the hall, but saying that Jack was not their family. And I mean, why do you think he said that? I mean, why do you think it's only because of Mary, or do you think there was more to it? And Kristen, it's your turn.
Yeah.
Go first.
If anybody had seen my response on Twitter when I was sort of live tweeting, I just there it is, exclamation point. Because he's been keeping that feeling and that thought in his head for a very long time. He's been holding on to it, not saying it, and that moment of just it just like all restraints were off, and he blurted it out when he otherwise has probably just been keeping it in for a very long time. So that, I think, is kind of his true feeling, mother or not, death, her death or not, that he just does not really see Jack in that same way as he does maybe with Castiel and Bobby. So
Right.
I think that was his real final true feelings, just blurted out for everybody to hear and it was just the emotion of the moment. He got caught up in it, and just like all of us, it's very relatable. If you're in a very high emotional moment, you might say something when all your guards are dropped that otherwise you try to keep
Would not
inside.
say.
So,
well, I'd say
yeah.
that feeds into really the couple of episodes back, right? They had the conversation with Dean and Jack and everybody about hey, I know you did X, Y, and Z and about forgiveness. And he was like, I'm trying. But we also know from a human standpoint that what he said came out exactly how resentment works, right? When you know you have a resentment that you haven't quite gotten past, and you look at the gravity of what they were doing and the emotion of it all, that's exactly why it blurted out, right? That's a very deep-seated resentment. You killed my mom, right? That's not something I get over in a year or get over in a year or two, right? It's, no, I'm really still holding on to this, and I've been suppressing it. And in this moment, this is how it becomes public.
Okay.
It's
Beth.
I'm not okay.
The problem is he had 743 opportunities to walk it back with Jack, including a very lengthy pause in the Impala that he himself
Right.
brought on, and didn't. And it didn't ring right for me. It flies in the face of the Dean we've been watching for 15 years. The one who said that family does, 2 years ago said family doesn't end in blood, but it doesn't start there either. That's and given all the other stuff that he has done, that Sam has done when they weren't entirely in their right minds either, it just, yes, blurting it out, absolutely. I agree with you there on that, Damien, completely. But he had so many opportunities to at least walk it back a little bit, and he didn't. And that tweaked me as much as him pulling a gun on, more than pulling a gun on Sam did. And that's why I want to see what's going, because where we started this whole conversation was, what the hell is up with Dean? Because there's got to be more to it than this.
Yeah, and in the
Because,
car, he didn't have, well, as you said, he had these opportunities, and he didn't say, he never actually said, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it the way it sounded.
Right.
He tried to explain away why he had said it. Beth, what
You
about
Maybe
shouldn't have
he
heard
didn't
that.
mean it.
Right.
I think Kristen's theory is probably the correct one, but I also wonder if part of it is that, again, Dean is very stubborn. He feels like this is the only possible solution, even though it means that Jack is going to die. And so he is purposely kind of putting up a barrier between himself and Jack so that he doesn't get too emotionally attached, so that when the time comes, it is easier to sacrifice Jack by saying, oh, no, I don't care about him. He's not family. I don't mind sacrificing him. Because I think if he was really honest with himself, he would realize that, yes, despite the fact that Jack killed Mary, he does care very much for him, and ultimately in his right mind would not want to lose him this way.
Okay. And Gail.
I think it's classic Dean Winchester dealing with betrayal. If you look at what kinds of terrible, cruel things he said to Sam in seasons 4 and 3, and this was not when he was under the influence of the cursed penny or the mark of Cain. This is just Dean being, you betrayed me with Ruby, and you are becoming a monster, and you're something I would want to hunt. And he said some terrible things to Sam. He said some pretty terrible things to Cass at the beginning of the season, or the end of last season. Well, how come everything goes wrong and the common thread is always you? And so they had their big blow up. When Dean feels betrayed, he lashes out. And later, usually after the person dies, he has this massive load of guilt because he didn't really he meant it in the moment. He meant it in a way, but it didn't negate his love for the person. It hurt so much to be betrayed because he loved so much. And it really screwed up psychologically, but that's classic Dean. And so in a way, I'm expecting Jack dies, something terrible happens, and then Dean grieves because he knows he screwed up. But this is not as out of character for Dean when you think about it for a while as it might be. They're not really good role models for healthy coping.
So we're going to do an episode where we just completely address that Dean is just abusive, right?
Well,
On this special episode of Supernatural.
Yeah, a very special episode. Yes.
He
Well,
has
and that's
abusive to Sam many
Yeah.
times.
Oh,
Sam
sure.
forgives him, but
Because he's a
the
softie.
stuff being said to him, even when he wasn't being controlled, is really
Yeah.
hard to forgive.
He's abusive.
Dean Winchester, impulse control issues. Yes. You know, especially when it comes to the things that he says, because he's learned, you know, it used to be that he was more inclined to just fly off the handle in action. So maybe now he's kind of coming around to doing it with his words. And, you know, we'll see. And Damien, you mentioned seeing previews. Since I did not have power on Thursday night and had to watch the show online, I haven't seen the previews yet. So I need to find those
It's on the cable view. So,
for the upcoming episode. But I'm you know, looking forward to these last three. And I want to, we're out of time, but I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. Thanks to you, Keith, as our guest this evening. We appreciate it very much.
my pleasure.
And we will continue to have these discussions until the end. So we appreciate everyone who watches these, whether you are here watching them as we're doing it, or if you watch them later, which a number of people do. And we, you know, it's a chance for people to interact if they would like to. And if they decide they would rather sit back and just watch us chatter later, they can do that as well. But thanks so much to all of my wonderful panelists. And we will see you same place and same time next week to discuss this coming episode. So this week's episode. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank
And
you.
we'll see you later. Okay.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye.